So, Prince Edward's lawyers just dropped a document that has reportedly turned the entire monarchy on its head. And the timing of it, honestly, is what makes the whole thing feel scripted. Because for years, King Charles III had been operating on a quiet, comfortable assumption. He believed that as monarch, he could review, revise, and if necessary, reverse any decision his mother had made before she died.
Titles, leases, estates, gifts.
Anything tied to the working family could, in his view, be reopened. And on March 25, 2026, his own legal team confirmed in writing what Charles had spent years trying to deny.
He cannot.
What makes this so extraordinary is not the legal argument. It is who delivered it. Edward, the quietest of the Queen's 4 children. The one who never courted the press, never leaked, never fought publicly. Just handed over a file. And inside that file was a record of facts that, when stacked together, made the position of the King and Queen consort virtually indefensible. So here's where it starts. You have to understand what Elizabeth actually did in the final chapter of her life.
Because she wasn't improvising. She was locking down.
After Prince Philip died in April 2021, the Queen is reported to have told her inner circle something close to this. She did not want her children fighting over pieces of her legacy the way she had watched other families do it. She had studied the Windsor inheritance history. She had watched what contested objects had done to relationships inside the institution. And she decided her grandchildren and great-grandchildren would not inherit that mess. The mechanism she chose was unusually heavy for the modern monarchy. She signed a series of legally witnessed instruments, deeds of trust and letters of intent, that tied specific royal assets to specific titles, in most cases for the lifetime of the holder or longer. One of those instruments, signed in her own hand and witnessed by senior palace counsel, concerned the Duke of Edinburgh title. Her decision, clearly recorded, was that the title and everything functionally attached to it would pass in full to Prince Edward, with no executive review clause, no leaseback provision, no mechanism by which a sitting monarch could withdraw or reassign it. The Crown's own legal counsel confirmed the language at the time. There was no exit. That promise was fulfilled in April 2023, when Charles, then only weeks into his reign, formally handed his brother the Dukedom at a small private ceremony. The optics were warm. The press described it as a passing of the torch from one Duke of Edinburgh to another. But those who understood the paperwork behind the scenes say the moment was, in legal reality, the instant Charles lost a fight he didn't yet know he was going to pick. And if the story stopped there would be nothing for his lawyers to confirm. But it doesn't stop there. Because the Edinburgh title was only the front end. The body of the inheritance was Bagshot Park. Bagshot Park isn't a residence in the ordinary sense. It is a Tudor Gothic mansion, approximately 120 rooms, sitting inside Windsor Great Park on just over 51 acres of Crown-protected land. For generations it had been held as a grace and favor house, used by Crown estate tenants at peppercorn rates. In the late 1990s the property was deteriorating. The previous tenant, the Army Chaplains Division, had moved out in 1996. The Crown estate, by its own internal record, at one point seriously considered disposing of the asset entirely, floating proposals for hotel conversion, conference center use, full market disposal. There are reported Crown estate minutes from that period discussing exit strategies. Instead, the lease was offered to Prince Edward in 1998 under terms that were, even at the time, considered punishing. £5,000 per year for an initial 50-year term. The rent was nominal by design. What wasn't nominal was the obligation. Edward was required to restore the property from a state the Crown estate had effectively abandoned. He accepted the deal. He spent, by his own later accounting and by records later reviewed by the National Audit Office, approximately £1.36 million of his own private income over the initial phase, rebuilding systems, restoring the structure, modernizing what could not be preserved. The total project value approached £3 million when Crown estate contributions were factored in. Edward's personal share was the largest single private injection of capital by a working royal into a Crown estate asset in that period. After the restoration, the rent was reassessed to £90,000 per year, which the National Audit Office confirmed as the prevailing market value for the asset class. The arrangement ran, quietly and cleanly, for years.
Edward paid. The Crown estate audited. The books balanced.
There was never a complaint from the Treasury side. And then the picture gets jagged. Because while Edward was paying full freight, his brother Andrew was living at Royal Lodge under a long-standing arrangement that the National Audit Office later flagged for exactly the kind of discrepancy Edward's case would never have. Andrew's rent was not market. His repairs were not self-funded. He had not paid, as Edward had. The contrast was sitting in plain view inside the same estate portfolio. And the institution that allowed that asymmetry eventually turned its attention to the brother who had done everything by the book. Edward, knowing the building pressure, did something in 2007 that looks in hindsight like an act of almost eerie foresight. Through his private company, Eclipse Nominees Limited, he paid the Crown Estate a premium, reported in some accounts at around £5 million, to extend the lease to 150 years. The extension agreement contained a clause, unusual for royal leases, that gave him the right to assign or sell the leasehold interest and retain the proceeds. He had turned himself into the holder of a long-duration, high-value, transferable interest in a Crown-adjacent property. By conservative market valuation referenced in coverage of the dispute, that interest is now widely cited around £30 million. So when pressure began in 2025 and 2026 to formalize what was being described internally as a modernization review of royal leases and grace and favor arrangements, Bagshot Park was always going to be the center of it. The arithmetic was too obvious. £30 million of leasehold value, sitting outside direct Crown control, attached to a title the king had issued, held by a brother the new palace operation did not particularly need to keep comfortable. It is reported, and reported strongly by multiple outlets covering the dispute, that Charles believed he had the authority, as monarch, to invoke a sweeping review clause on properties connected to titles he had granted. Edward's lawyers now state, in writing, that no such general authority exists in law. The grant of a dukedom does not carry with it a reversionary interest in attached estates. It never has. This is the thing Charles denied for years. And the second front of the same file makes the denial look worse. Because the tiara question is, on its surface, smaller.
In scale, it is not.
Earlier in 2026, a representative from Queen Camilla's office, carrying documentation described officially as a routine heritage review, attended the Edinburgh residence to inspect jewellery holdings, in particular pieces identified as having come from historic collections. At the center of the inspection, according to multiple accounts, was the Anthem Tiara. To understand why that piece mattered, you have to know what it is. The Anthem Tiara was commissioned by Queen Elizabeth II personally, in 1999, as a wedding gift for Sophie Rhys-Jones ahead of her marriage to Prince Edward. It was constructed by the Crown jeweller using antique elements drawn from a private collection of Queen Victoria, including golden stones from the Victorian era, arranged in a honeysuckle motif. For 25 years, it was the only major tiara Sophie was permitted to wear at state and ceremonial occasions. That last fact matters. Sophie was never given access to the grand state tiaras the way senior royals had traditionally been. The anthem was her one crown. Remove it, and the Duchess becomes a ceremonial figure wearing borrowed pieces. The argument that came through Camilla's office, by way of legal correspondence, was that the Anthem Tiara, because it contained elements drawn from Queen Victoria's collection, was classifiable as Crown property. The Crown property classification argued that the piece should be held in the central royal vault, issued out only for approved official appearances. The implication was clear. Sophie would no longer own the tiara she had worn on her wedding day. She would have to request it for use. The logic was explosive. Because if the Victorian elements test counts as Crown, then it counts across the portfolio. Dozens of pieces gifted across the 70 years of Elizabeth's reign that contain historic elements could be reclassified. The argument does not stop at Sophie. It sweeps across the family. And it applies on its own terms to Camilla's own jewellery, much of which also passed to her through royal holdings. The rule Edward's lawyers identified as dangerous cuts both ways. And the public memory made it worse. Because the last time something like this happened, the country watched it happen in real time. After Princess Diana's death, a diamond and emerald necklace, given to Diana by the Queen Mother as a wedding gift in 1981, was reportedly returned to the royal vault. Rather than being preserved as Diana's legacy, the necklace was documented as having been redesigned into a brooch and worn publicly. People did not stay quiet. Public reaction was sharp, ongoing, and unresolved. That pattern, taking a private gift from a senior royal and reabsorbing it, was now repeating in a different room with a different woman. Edward's lawyers shut it down at the root. They produced a deed of gift signed by Elizabeth personally in 1999 that explicitly classified the Anthem Tiara as a private wedding present to Sophie. Not a loan. Not a shared asset. Not trust held. A deed of gift is the strongest form of transfer a private donor can make short of probate. Elizabeth had signed it. She had witnessed it with counsel. And the language contained no recall clause, no reversionary trigger, no review mechanism tied to the successorship of the crown. There was more. In 1999, Edward had separately worked with a crown jeweler to design a matching set, a necklace and earrings of black and white pearls intended to be worn visually with the Anthem Tiara as a single artistic unit. Crown funds paid for the materials. Edward held the design rights. The set was not a gift. It was intellectual property he controlled. His lawyers argued that the tiara and the pearl suite formed one artistic work in which he held an authorship stake. Remove one element and you damage the work. That gave him a second, independent legal layer that did not depend on the deed of gift at all. By the afternoon of March 25, 2026, the situation had collapsed from audit into standoff. Edward's lawyers delivered the document to the palace.
And with it, a warning.
If the audit was not withdrawn by the end of the day, they would release private correspondence from Elizabeth herself, correspondence that confirmed her intent that Sophie retain full personal ownership of pieces gifted during her reign. According to accounts from those close to the file, the letters did not stop at jewelry. They included reflections on Camilla. The threat was not a leak. It was a controlled detonation. Charles understood the math. Those letters, if released, would reopen the long, cold public question of how Elizabeth had regarded Camilla across decades. The queen consort position, the rehabilitation that had taken years of careful public engineering, would be jeopardized by a single archival release.
The threat landed.
But pressure on paper was never going to be enough. What walked through the door next was Princess Anne, and entered a private room inside Buckingham Palace that same afternoon. There was no warm opening.
No small talk.
She went straight to Charles. And her argument was not about property. It was about authority. And said that allowing a sitting monarch to reopen, revise or recall a private gift or lease that a previous monarch had signed into law would break the chain of trust that holds the crown. If Elizabeth's signature on a deed of gift or a lease could be reclassified by her son, then Charles's own signature, on every instrument he would sign for the rest of his reign, would be worth less than the paper it was written on. She had reviewed the Bagshot file personally. She had read the Crown Estate minutes. She understood the £1.36 million Edward had paid. She understood the £5 million lease extension. She understood the market value reassessment of the rent. Her position was unambiguous.
The agreement stands.
The Crown took Edward's money under those terms. There is nothing left to argue. And drew the two disputes together. The tiara and the lease were not separate. They were both signed instruments from the same monarch, challenged by the same argument, defended by the same evidence. If one falls, the other falls. If both fall, nothing Elizabeth signed is safe. And there was a personal weight to the meeting that made it heavier. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, lost her own mother young. Over the decades, the Queen had become the closest thing she had to a maternal figure.
And knew that.
And had lost her father in 2021, her mother in 2022. She knew exactly what the remaining objects of a lost parent mean. When the tiara was targeted, and did not see paperwork, she saw a daughter-in-law being asked to surrender something that belonged to the woman who had stood in for her mother. And went further. She told Charles that if Camilla did not withdraw the audit, and would oversee a full public audit of the Queen's household.
Not a summary. Expenses. Staffing.
Allocations tied directly to Camilla's office. The threat landed because and is the one royal whose financial discipline has been publicly documented for decades. If she said she would expose something, she meant it. She also raised Edward's children, James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor. There was, according to multiple accounts of the dispute, pressure to push them into formally private lives earlier than planned, stripping their protected status and the security that came with it.
And stopped it.
She said the decision belonged to their parents and to them, not to the office of the Queen Consort. And had chosen a private life for her own children, Peter and Zara, years ago. But she had chosen it.
No one had forced it.
The distinction mattered to her. Charles sat with two options, and both cost him something. He could back Camilla and absorb the legal exposure of overriding his mother's signed instruments on file. Or he could step back and accept that Elizabeth's decisions, witnessed, recorded, financed, held.
He stepped back.
Late on March 25, his own legal team delivered its formal conclusion. The Edinburgh position as it stood, was virtually unbreakable. No royal order could override a deed of gift or a long-vested leasehold that the grantor monarch had personally signed. A formal note was sent that night from the office of the Master of the Jewel House to Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh.
Short. Direct. No apology. No explanation.
The Anthem Tiara would remain under her exclusive private control. At the same time, the Bagshot Park Review was closed. The official language described it as recognition of the Edinburgh household's role in maintaining the asset. Everyone inside the palace understood what it actually meant. The crown had lost. But the loss came with a cost that cannot be repaired. The relationship between Charles and Edward is no longer personal. It is procedural. Limited to duty. The public will see unity. They will see two brothers standing side by side. Inside the family, they will know what it took to make that posture possible. One brother had to use the law to protect himself from the other. That doesn't heal. The structure of the monarchy has shifted. There are now two clearly defined centers of weight. Buckingham Palace under Charles and Camilla. A quieter bloc led by Edward, Sophie and Anne, supported in private by William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales. That bloc is not loud.
But it holds a line.
It will not allow what was built before to be casually rewritten. For James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor, the lesson is already permanent. They watched their father fight without public drama.
He fought with documents. He fought with patience.
He fought with a record the institution could not break. One day, James will carry the Duke of Edinburgh, a title his grandfather held for over 70 years. He will carry it knowing the institution can give and the same institution can try to take back. That knowledge changes a person. It does not produce loyalty.
It produces caution.
Charles has his monarchy. He has his authority. He has his structure. What he does not have anymore is the full trust of one brother who stood quietly for decades, paid his own way, and asked for nothing beyond the right to keep what was given to him. That loss doesn't appear on paper. But it will over time, when the silence settles, and the documents are all anyone reads.